So here in this case, you see Trump is fighting not just against trade surplus or it's not out of jealousy as many people think. He is seeing a direct correlation between the geopolitical behavior of China, a rising China. That alone is not his concern. His concern is also, because he's a developmentalist, his concern is that the American working class, the American manufacturing base, the businesses, the working class, the businesses moved out, the jobs went away. And that in turn leads to a failure of a generation, the forgotten ones. So if you look at India, we are now having the same problem. What do we learn from that? We look at India, we see in the past 20 years, we see that the unemployment rate, the jobless rate, is reaching historic highs. And nobody has looked into what has happened in these same 20 years since signing of the Davos and the World Trade Organization. How much of jobs that China has stolen from India? How much of our own businesses have relocated their manufacturing facilities like the truck firm, the farmer, and the manufactured capital goods that have moved over to China, taking advantage of so many things that
because
they don't
in his
know.
judgment, right, the president wasn't smart enough to understand what he was doing. Well, here's what Trump's done. The new NAFTA deal that he's created is basically setting up a geostrategic manufacturing base to counter East Asia. Okay? And Japan is very quickly going to be part of that. A bilateral deal, not some TPP deal where we're just one among many. A direct bilateral deal with Japan as a partner. We've got one with Korea we're updating. And then the EU, Juncker has already told Trump, has already indicated that they're going to be a part of this too. What Donald Trump has done in less than 2 years against the second law of thermodynamics, right? The immutable law of the rise of China.
Right.
What he's done is reorient the entire world's supply chain away from China. And this is going to have economic growth opportunities that are going to be incredible. And he's done that kind of single-handedly against the fighting of the corporatist lobby, the fighting of the Wall Street Investor Relations Department, etc. So that's why I think it's really heroic.
And nobody has quantified it. Unless we look into it, we will not know how much of our own economic stagnation is due to that. So far we looked at it as a bystander of some kind of scuffle in the bar. But right now, it is something else. It's ours. It's our mess as well. Thing is that we have looked into it. So the other way of going about it is resolve ourselves that we are going to this time not miss the bus. We missed when America was similarly in a situation looking for suppliers. It was in a Cold War with the communist bloc. Just now it is in a Cold War with the communist regime of China, unaware or afraid of its expansionism. And those countries that step forward to build supply chain, like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, all of them moved up. We missed the bus because we're looking elsewhere on the other side of this Cold War divide. And for the much part of it, we made another mistake of non-alignment, which was again an idea mooted by Marxists to keep you away from the bus, catching the bus. And this time we are catching the bus. In many ways, we share the values of the free world. We are part of the free world. We are the frontline states facing global jihad. That's one reason enough. And as far as containing the communist expansionism, we are again a frontline state because the frontline democracy, we are standing up for democracy. And so in many ways, the relocation of businesses, American businesses, Western businesses from China to India is a logical corollary of seeking to contain an expansionist, communist expansionist together, put an economic expedition team that will simultaneously seek the list of companies that Trump wants to leave China. EU help you with it and relocate elsewhere and reach out to them, providing a better relocation environment. I hear that some of the curbs, socialist curbs like saying you can only do this much business, that much business, regulations is something we should start cracking down on. Because you see, we are 136 in the list of ease of business. In my previous circle, I mentioned it. I'm happy that Modi took action. He called the finance minister and took action on it. Make business easier to do. And when this relocation process, keep that in mind. Make it easier for them to relocate. Give them more reasons to relocate. So it is not that only Indians were making this mistake about Pakistan. The successive American administrations, they are equally doing this mistake, pumping billions of dollars. That is what it's saying. Billions of dollars repeatedly, fully knowing till then Bin Laden comes crawling out of the closet. So they too are equally blind, and the same mistake is what we're doing with China here. We think we are very wise, and what after all is Nehru's blunder? We keep saying Nehru, the whole war is because of Nehru's blunder, and what is that blunder? Blind trust of China, without being very blind, unable to take into account all that China could be possibly do suddenly. So keep that in mind. That is what is Nehru's mistake. Trust of China. That is what we are repeating here. All right. When China retaliated with tariffs on agriculture, Japan stepped in to provide the market for the agro exports for the American ranchers and agriculturalists. India likewise must fulfill this need of America to relocate its companies and manufacturers from China. They want them to come out of China, pull out back to the United States, and the second option they are suggesting is relocate elsewhere to any country that shares our values. This is an euphemism for countries like us. India qualifies for this. And we must understand that India must exploit this Trump's pressure on American companies to exit China and bring them to India. You must be value neutral in certain instances, in the sense that if you're too judgmental on these things, what happens is that you miss out on your national interest. It is in our interest. China that is being contained is contained because it poses a threat. And when China flexes its muscle, India will be the first to receive the blow. They will first step on our shoes. We have historical experience of it. We have lost Aksai Chin, a large area of Jammu and Kashmir. And then we have also, China is claiming parts of Indian territory like Arunachal Pradesh. And what it would historically do is,
I believe that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is a terror organization. I think it terrorizes the Chinese people. I think that's the only reason that it's in power is because it has the ability to have, basically to have complete, total, it's a surveillance state. It's a totalitarian surveillance state that gets worse every day, right? And more paranoid every day. Its control of the Chinese people is because of that. One thing they have for the legitimacy is the economy. If the economy was to start to collapse, right, because of their actions, not anybody else's actions, I think they would lose any legitimacy they have. And I think the only people, and I've said this for a long time, the only people that can get rid of the CCP are the Chinese people, right? This is a matter for the Chinese people to deal with. And I think that's why Hong Kong is so important, because you've seen for the first time really a consistent, since Tiananmen, right, a consistent resistance to their more totalitarian rule.
that's it. That is indeed the crux of the matter with China. That's the crux of the problem. That each time we extend the hand of friendship to the CCP, we forget the CCP, and we extend the hand of friendship, mistaking China as a fellow Asian country, and mistaking China as a normal country. We make China dictate, turn, misbehave, and set the new normal for the free world. China continues to keep on doing it. It does not back out 1 inch anywhere, whether it is Tibet, or whether it is the South China Sea, or whether it is the Arunachal Pradesh claim, or whether it is Nepal itself, which is now it is gobbling it up, or whether it is a Maoist interaction insurrection. They have a Maoist insurrection inside India, which is an extension of the PLA. It is nothing but a proxy war that the PLA is conducting, just like the ISI is conducting a proxy war through its terror apparatus and group. The PLA is conducting its own insurrection against India, well within its own borders, border the Northeast, where it's extending support to Northeast insurrection groups, as well as it is doing support to the Maoist insurrections, ultra-leftist, Maoist, Naxalites, the ultra-Marxist insurrections inside the jungles of India. So we are, each time we are extending the hand of friendship to China, giving it the benefit of doubt, wishing it would get better over the years. Actually, China is getting normalized. We are setting the new normal. And then we are helping, we are empowering. Never forget that any ideologically incompatible entity that you are empowering never comes without a consequence, never comes without a price tag. You will have to face the consequences sooner or later. Empowering someone who is either a potential rival or someone who is ideologically incompatible like the CCP, together with the global jihadists, with the Wahhabis, who are also another set of anachronistic powers. Anachronistic powers. They do not belong to 21st century. Both of them. One belongs to 7th century, another belongs to the early 20th, perhaps 19th century EU. And they do not belong here. That time is over. And these anachronistic powers, this brotherhood of bandits of CCP and the rogue states of Pakistan, and that's the crux of the problem. That is the crux of the problem with China. Because each time we extend our hands of friendship with China, China has been taking advantage of us, just like Pakistan has been doing over the years. We used to hear that the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh used to repeat it like a mantra. A strong and prosperous Pakistan is in interest of, best interest of India, without explaining how so. So the leftists find it very easy to float around such ideas. You see, they have these guys in higher places to float around such ideas, which you swallow up without question. How so is it in the best interest that a rogue state like Pakistan gets built up? And see, beautifully, Shankar nailed the problem beautifully in one word to the Russian envoy, that Pakistan is a problem state because it is an abnormal state. It's abnormal. And this applies to China much more so. You see, it is an abnormal state, it's an anachronistic state. Both are anachronistic states. They don't belong to the 21st century. One belongs to the 7th century. They want to take it all back to the 7th century with its theocratic ideas, and the communist regime, that is the CCP, wants to drag a past, a dystopic past of a Maoist state.
States have to understand one thing. The Chinese look at us as a tributary state to them, and let me explain that. China's been around for 4,000 years, right? They've had good runs and they've had bad runs, okay? But one thing they know, and the reason they're still organized as a nation over 4,000 years, right? They know how to handle allies and they know how to handle bad guys, okay? Now what they've done is they've got this system called barbarian management, and they know how to manage barbarians. The way they manage the barbarians is they take the leaders of the barbarians and they give them a taste of the good life. And you're going to be something special. You're going to get a special deal. Now, what happens back into the tributary state is whatever happens. That's your problem. Right. Okay? So in the United States, what they have done for 25 and 30 years is played us as a barbarian state, barbarian management. Okay? They incentivize our elites, and our elites deindustrialize, particularly the upper Midwest of this country. It's the reason Donald Trump's president. Your audience should understand one thing that's important is that, you know, J.D. Vance, the great guy from Yale who wrote Hillbilly Elegies, is the best sociological study of the Trump voter. And it was J.D. Vance who told me, he says, hey, those studies that come out of MIT and Harvard show that there's a direct correlation between the factories that left for China, the jobs that left with them, and the opioid crisis.
You see, the problem with China is each time you extend your hands of friendship, China has taken advantage of it. Not budged 1 inch. It has not budged 1 inch anywhere, whether it is Kachin or whether it is Tibet. And right under your nose, as we are talking, it's gobbling up Nepal. You see, look at Nepal. It is a funny place now. It used to be a conservative, traditional monarchy that used to call itself as a Hindu state. First it was pressed with the full cooperation of the Western mainstream media, cheerleading it into abandoning its cultural uniqueness from being a monarchy and a Hindu state, just like the Saudis are, into a secular state. And we were hoping to see a truly democratic secular state. Instead, what we have is a very funny, strange looking place where every other party is Maoist. Every other party has names like People's this and People's that and Revolutionary this and Revolutionary that. It's full of zombies, political zombies, that you cannot find even in South America. That becomes a real specimen case. And then China has actually, the CCP has taken over the polity, the Nepalese polity. Whether it is the ruling party or the coalition of the opposition, it's all against communists. So it has mobilized the Nepalese politics. So it's a de facto clan state, satellite state already. And then that is why I believe the next rolling in of the aggression is going to come. China has changed its tactics over the years. It has fine-tuned its tactics. That takeovers are no longer military, but through economic devices and re-engineering the polity. You see, so many communist parties mushroom. So the leftists know how to do this. So they float around these ideas. And one of these ideas is a strong and prosperous China, and rising along with China is good for India, without explaining how so. Because China is the top dog of this brotherhood of bandits, of rogue states like Pakistan, Iran, North Korea. They are the brotherhood of bandits against the free world. And to look at it, detaching it from its geostrategic and political ambition and its worrisome relationship and building up of Pakistan is not only injurious, it is suicidal. And and we're talking about Nehru's blunder all the time. We are talking about Nehru's blunder all the time, without realizing the Nehruvian blunders, Himalayan blunders we ourselves are doing. And what, sir, is Nehru's blunder? Was the blind trust of China, an aversion to the West that you're overcoming now. I'm glad that you're doing it, and you're realizing you're part of the free world, not a part of that bloc, the other bloc, the Soviet bloc was a mistake. You're recognizing that. And then you went for a middle ground and see that it goes nowhere, and you're realizing our interest lies on this side of the fence. You're making some progress there. But what you're failing to realize is this, that you are unwittingly helping with this brotherhood of bandits, failing to recognize they are a pact. It's Pakistan, China-Pakistan axis.
President say, we're not going to do this. And Lighthizer is savvy enough. So you had an agreement. And that agreement basically started to bring the Chinese economy into the world economy, to get away from the slave labor that's really gone on in China and this oppression of Chinese workers. And so it was the beginning of a rapprochement. And that's why hardliners in China, and particularly hardliners after this Belt Road Initiative conference they had, where they think, the Wan Shishans in the world think that, hey, we've got the West where we want them. We got One Belt, One Road, we have Made in China 2025, and we have Huawei. The conversion of that will make us the dominant hegemon.
So, the whole idea was to wean away the CCP and the Chinese, through the Chinese cultural contacts, to slowly wean them away from materialism, Marxist dialectics. But what actually happened was China kept on pushing itself, so much so that this is Nepal. In Nepal, what you find here is that they first set up all kinds of Maoist proxies. They're all funded by the CCP. All these Maoist proxy parties, which have actually first they started just like in India, a Maoist insurrection, a civil war, at the end of which the Maoists gained political power. And the first thing they did was go after the spiritual life of the Nepalis. So as a first step, they passed a bill to take over all the temple lands, and that resulted in this huge uprising, just like what you saw in Hong Kong. Though the CCP is not directly in power, this is in fact the kind of result we get for the earlier policy we tried, which was actually drafted by me, that we focus on the culture and ignore all these things. But then we find this is the only Hindu kingdom in the world, and in these past 2 decades, you see it has first big, gone through a civil war, Maoist insurrection, and the Maoists have captured power, and they have completely changed the outlook of the people. And now, when they're coming to culture, the people are resisting. That is the beauty of it. You see, as far as Indians, as far as the Hindus, this is a Hindu kingdom, and maybe Buddhists is concerned, the material well-being is secondary to spiritual well-being. For them, the spiritual dimension, the spiritual life is much more important. Culture is more important for them than even material well-being. And so that is why you see they are resisting it. And so when you look at all that, even with Dalai Lama, you see the CCP is claiming to be the Lamas who will be actually picking up the next Dalai Lama wherever he is born, which is a process of spiritual tradition. It's a belief that they are able to, someone among them will meditate and find out where the next Dalai Lama will be reborn. And the CCP now says we will be Dalai Lamas. We will be Lamas, meditate, and the Politburo will tell you where he is born again. All this is so laughably ridiculous. And so this is what is happening. When we start talking about culture and try to wean it away from spirituality, CCP pretends to come along with us, and that has its own, agenda of destroying all vestiges of spirituality wherever it is possible for it to do so. So it would be wise if we modify our China stand, and though not actually be necessarily confrontationist, but it is within our legitimate rights to try to obtain as many of these American companies that Trump is going to persuade to, it's going to be even all kinds of Western companies as well, to relocate elsewhere and try to gain as many of them, try to get as many of them to set up shop in India, because India probably is having this downturn because of the flight of capital and the manufacturing bases. So many of our companies have gone over there and set up shop leveraging our own capital markets. So that study also has to be done. And first we have to kind of try spiritualize the outlook of the Chinese Communist Party, which Trump is going to ask even European companies to exit China, and we have to get as many of them to relocate to India, and that would be a wiser thing to do. But at the same time, keep continuing our pressure, soft pressure rather, on China to kind of accommodate the cultural life. So as many of cultural expeditions and cultural contacts as possible.
His greatness, I think you're seeing his rise to greatness as a president.
So why have all these past presidents folded, as you describe?
Well, it's very simple. It's the same pressure that's on President Trump. It's the IR department and the lobbyists. What they folded because Wall Street and the corporations. They always fold for the same reason.
They fold because the corporate interests come to them and say, oh, we can't do it. Think about Trump's trade negotiations now. We have a totalitarian, mercantilist system that we've allowed to kind of metastasize. That's what I'm against. The reason every administrator is folded is because of money and power. And you've seen, and it's not that people were bad people. They folded because they were always told, here's the lie they were told, and what the elites in this country believed. If you see from the time we brought the Chinese in to the World Trade Organization and gave most favored nation status, that as China became materialistically wealthier, as they started to develop a middle class, they would become more a free market and a democracy with rule of law, and they would become more open and a real citizen of the world.
Right.
And we've seen the exact opposite. In the last 20 years, the CCP has become more radical. They become more dangerous. They become more corrupt. They become more gangster-like. And why is that? Because they have a totalitarian system they run for their own 12 or 15 families that essentially skims the money off the top and then tries to money launder it into the West and to buy real estate in New York City or the city of London. You go to Belgravia, you go to the West End of London, a lot of that is Chinese money. Chinese to on and on and on. And finally, when they realized what they were signing up for, hardline elements into the CCP said, no way. We'd rather confront the West and confront them now. And you've seen what's happened to the Chinese economy. So this war, this economic war, has three major aspects. Trade is only one. You have both a technology piece and a currency piece. And just this morning, as we started this interview, President Trump had been talking about basically pulling the plug on Huawei across the board. The Commerce Department just announced they're going to give them another 90-day extension. But Huawei is the technology piece. The currency piece is another. And I said 2 weeks ago on CNBC, we're passing a psychological barrier here. We had, created hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth. He knows what he says. He's accused Google and some of these other companies of actually being treasonous and traitors for what they're doing with the CCP and not doing with Western defense departments. I think that's all going to come out in time. But I just heard today that I think Twitter was actually selling ads for the CCP against the Hong Kong protesters, whereas they're cutting off sort of the Hong Kong protesters. That's all going to be reviewed. People have to understand this. A focus on technology, and particularly this technology that is dealing with helping the CCP keep the firewall up. All of that's going to be under a lot of scrutiny in the future. I believe we're being in a trade war. And I have said this to the Chinese people. The CCP cannot win these. The CCP cannot win these. The only reason this situation has gotten as bad as it's gotten is because the capitalists in the West, the Wall Street and the City of London, and certain corporatists, certain elites, what I call the Party of Davos, right, have basically financed the CCP and has allowed them to get technology. Those days are over. President we've ever had about the CCP. But you actually have people getting to the right of him. And I think the political calculation, like I said, the one thing that has united the United States, we're not united on any other topic except one, and that's the CCP. Today he made the announcement he would support Elizabeth Warren for the simple fact he thinks she's tougher on China than Trump. Now, I don't believe that, but my point is that now in the political marketplace in the United States, stopping the CCP is getting every day to be a bigger and bigger issue. And I think
for his re-election.
No, President Trump definitely does not need a trade deal for his re-election. If American people see President Trump standing up to the CCP, Wall Street's the cheerleader, and corporate America has been the lobbyist. And it's the working men and women in the middle class in this country have paid the price. Remember, over the last 20 years, we've deindustrialized the United States. Right. And we shipped those manufacturing jobs to China. We shipped the manufacturing jobs to China. They sent in the opioids and the fentanyl to go into the old manufacturing areas in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan, where that depression and angst, right, and fear because the manufacturing jobs have left and people are left with no futures. And so what did they do in that anxiety? They turned to fentanyl, they turned to opioids. This is a not just a crisis, it's a tragedy of the United States. Donald Trump, the central reason he's president of the United States is this. He said, we have to return America to her former greatness. We have to make America great again. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to confront the Chinese Communist Party about Wall Street has shipped those jobs over there, and I am going to bring them back. And today, you saw in this confrontation is exactly what it is. This is the fulfillment of his basic campaign promise. He told the little guy, you haven't, not in the room, not in the deal. You have not been in the room for 25 or 30 years. You're now in the room and I'm your voice.
And Donald Trump has been systematically weakening Pakistan through repeated aid cuts, denial of military hardware, restrictions of use, refusal to support its Kashmir stand. Trump has also been waging this trade war against China that has crippled its economy, halted its imperialist expansionism. I foresee that Nepal will be the next place, or Arunachal Pradesh will be the next place where China will expand into. Don't wait for that. When somebody is weakening it, be smart, build yourself up economically. And the weakening of the two hostile powers, China and Pakistan, is an opportunity for India to rise stronger. So that is the gist of my presentation here.